William,
Sam,
yeah, sorry, it took a few more extra days to remember to send you that link. So thanks for reminding.
that's all right.
So did you watch it?
Yes, I watched the snippet.
It's actually part of a larger context between Jaswinder and Colin and myself, and probably a few others. But anyway, that was the part where I was trying to respond to Colin, and I don't know if you heard any before that or after that, but there's some context there. But that's the precise piece that I thought it would be curious to get your feedback on.
Well, I noticed that you're good at accessing emotion and to well, you call it ranting. I don't I I wouldn't call it ranting. There's just the way you access that intensity of emotion and find words to express it without without going over the top. Because when people are in that state, they can often use language that is over the top, but you maintained your focus on. So there's something there that I'm interested in that. What is it that's tapping? Um, it's always interesting because I know Heiner a bit, not much, but he's always been around. But often Heiner just gets up, walks away, changes his background, does all these things. When
Yep.
things get intense or when things get interesting, he gets up and he leaves. I've noticed that over the years with I was noticing that some people kept changing their backgrounds, not sure how to respond to you, which is interesting in itself.
Period.
Um, and I'm also interested in how you made the point about triggering that one takes one's own responsibility. So where's the balance between I'm now aware I'm being triggered and those who aren't even aware they're being triggered? And then the community saying, are you aware you're being triggered? And once it's been aware, right, I'll now deal with it. Rather than, as you said, that what I think you were saying was that the whole community gets taken away into this triggering and loses focus on what the whole point of the current flow is. And
Yes.
I find that it's maybe subtle ways of gaining attention. We're very good. It's one of these things I always learn was that we're very good at, people are in general very good at getting attention in many ways, either by shouting or by saying nothing or by responding or not responding. We've got very good ways of, and especially in groups. I've done a lot of group facilitation, and groups are, if people don't feel they're having a voice, or they can go two ways. They can just shut up and just disappear, or they can then try and take over. It's very hard to get that balance where people feel heard and are being able to share what's happening for them. And that's a balance of good facilitation and also being good at being facilitated. A lot of people aren't good at that. Um, and then I don't know the context before and after, if it's specifically what Colin, or if that's a history there, or if the two of you have discussed that separately, or is this a recurring theme regarding um, people being triggered by something, which then just leads the whole group astray?
Okay. So let me kind of paint you my picture of what the larger context is. Okay. This has been a recurring theme within GCC probably the most of its 3 year existence, especially on Sundays. Okay. Because Sundays is a session that I actually host, with my account, but Doug Breitbart moderates. Okay. Now, in the sessions that I host and moderate, those are Saturdays. Okay. So the difference being Sundays is called unblocking. And according to that, it's really with dealing with triggers, dealing with obstacles to collaboration, obstacles to connection, obstacles to love, obstacles to co-visioning, all that stuff. Okay. Saturdays is called barn raising slash foundation laying. And that's really trying to figure out, is there some place that we want to move as a group? So there are specific different questions that underline each of these. But obviously, once you get into it, there's a lot of overlap. Okay. Because in order to actually move somewhere, you got to eliminate all these obstacles towards movement. And so if we can't do it in Saturday, typically we sometimes bring it to Sunday conversations. Okay. And this thing with colon, and I'm aware we're being recorded, but this has actually been public knowledge within GCC for quite a while, is that Colin and Jaswinder have a long running, mutually triggering kind of conversation. Jaswinder will bring up spiritual topics or evolutionary topics regarding the origin of the universe, why we're here, this sort of thing. Okay. Colin will respond by saying he doesn't believe in religion, he doesn't believe in being prescribed, what is good or bad, and religion is the source of truth. Colin is much more a believer in science and scientific method. So almost anytime the topics get at all implied, bam, there's this mutual, well, less so on Jaswinder's part. It used to be that they used to go like this, but now it's, in my opinion and my observation, mostly that Colin brings it up pretty frequently. To the point where the group, especially on Saturdays, can sometimes get waylaid and distracted for sometimes, 5-10 minutes, often an hour or more. Okay. And trying to see whether or not these guys can actually come to an agreement. So we actually spent one entire session saying, okay, this has gone on long enough. You guys, let's take one complete session. Let's see whether or not we can come to some kind of agreement where this doesn't keep happening. It wasn't entirely successful because the session that I showed you this link for was after that dedicated session that was supposed to address this issue. So that's why, to me, it's actually a very, very germane topic for collaboration, for GCC, and for my lack of moderation skills in being able to move us past that. Okay. So either we have to come up with some very firm guidelines that are imposed on the group, because as a group, given the opportunity to emerge those guidelines themselves, that hasn't really happened. So that's one of the issues I wanted to get your feedback on, is that unless I take a heavier hand in moderation, I've not been able to let the group emerge a set of guidelines that would address this kind of issue. So that is a question for you as a facilitator / moderator in many group sessions, whether or not you found a way where groups could come up with this on their own, or it just has to be just imposed and prescribed and enforced.
Well, I think that first of all, that Jaswinder and Colin they're cohering towards something that keeps showing up. So there's something that they agree on, even if they don't agree on those bits. So it may be that they don't want to agree, and that's it. I mean, maybe they don't want to find a way of agreeing or collaborating on something, even if they have these profoundly different ways of seeing the world or responding to it. And that's a question to them. Is that why they're showing up? Maybe they show up because they like that potential fight. Because I often find when people have deep spiritual views or deep non-spiritual or anti-spiritual views, that's their guiding energy, and that's what they just want to talk about. That it's nothing. Everything else is secondary. So it could be that's why they keep showing up. So it's I've not been attending I think 1 or 2 years ago, but generally, if there is a guiding force towards any group, there's something that's keeping everyone together, and it's what that is. And the second thing I've always found in groups, and it's been, I forget who said it, but in terms of physics, what brought the group together in the first place, if that story is remembered, it usually keeps the group together. So it's a bit like that. The reason many native cultures still exist is because they've kept their stories alive, and they keep telling them to the children, and they keep telling them to their children, and so on. This is why we're here. So that originating, finding impulse, if that is remembered, we're here, we're responding to a call from an organization regarding global challenges. That's why we are here. If that has now been lost and then we're now discussing these things, the energy of the roots of this tree are no longer here. And then I think it's agreements. If there is a trigger situation, do we agree that somebody puts the hand up saying, yes, hey, look, you've been triggered. And we now agree that if you are triggered and it's been made aware, then that person then takes responsibility either to leave the call or to step out or go internal for a while and go, right, okay, I'll deal with it. And then you move on. I mean, that's an agreement. And it seems to be that you usually get between 4, 5, and 7 people. Is that the normal number?
No, like for example, yesterday we had about a dozen.
Right.
Sometimes we've had as many as 15.
Okay.
Rarely more than that.
And is there a specific project that everyone is working towards?
Okay. Not yet,
Mm-hmm.
but there is kind of this felt or shared hope. I wouldn't even call it an intention. It might be a hope at this point, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That we can emerge something like that, okay? So for the last 4 or 5 months, the focus of barn raising sessions has been focus. In other words, we said, is focus a good thing? Or do we just want to meander all over the place for 3 years? And everybody that goes to barn raising more or less conceded, or at least actively agreed that focus was good, and we wanted to achieve focus. So for about 4 months, the experiment that I proposed and everybody engaged in was bring a topic to which you would like us to focus for one entire session, and bring your moderation skills and facilitation skills and techniques and tools, whatever else in preparation. You take this session, you moderate it, you try to keep us on focus. And then we as a group, in the last 15 or 30 minutes, will say, did we achieve focus? Did did the facilitation methods actually assist us? Whatever new methods people wanted to bring in. And number 3, did we therefore co-create with this focus? So those were the retrospective kind of questions that I asked at the end of every session. Okay. So everybody that regularly comes to GCC, plus a few others, took an opportunity to take one particular Saturday and do exactly that experiment. We're done with probably 14, 15, 16 of those experiments. And so we had a separate retrospective on all of them together. And then we're now into a new session where we're actually asking ourselves, I asked either last week or the week before, once we have actually established focus as a crucial pillar of GCC barn raising, what is our next focus that we ought to clarify for ourselves? And Stacy came up with a very good one. She actually probably derived from focus. She said, we should focus on that which keeps us from focusing. What detracts us from focusing? What distracts us from focusing? Okay. So the topic of triggers, the topic of how do we do presencing, and how do we deal with obstacles to focus, that came up. And I was in that kind of exploratory conversation that we spent some time last Saturday talking about triggers and talking about how do we handle this. Because, in many other GCC conversations, okay, the intent has been everybody brings anything. The person is more important than the topic. If someone is triggered, we all take care of that person. Okay, so that has been Doug's preferred mode. That's been, preferred mode for others. Okay, and I'm saying, okay, for unblocking, for counseling sessions, that's perfectly fine, especially since it's set as a going in ground rule. But for Saturdays, where we actually want to potentially focus on what are the foundations, what are the windows we want to put together, what is the grand design, how do we want to co-vision, how do we want to do coexistence, how do we make agreements? For those kind of conversations to actually go somewhere on Saturdays, to me, there's a need, in my opinion, for people, participants, to come with some ability to deal with their own triggers. And for those abilities to help keep the focus of the conversation in focus. But if people come on Saturdays and frequently get focused and frequently distract the Saturday conversation from its intended purpose, or at least a stated agenda or topic, then the result is after 3 years, we don't seem to have much to show for it, and people don't seem to agree what was achieved. So that's why there's a difference between Saturdays and Sundays and Thursdays, in my opinion, how we ought to deal with these guidelines and how we ought to deal with focus and how we ought to deal with triggers. So that was the context that I wanted to give you on this.
There's one thing I'm aware of regarding collaboration is that there are some people, I'm not saying anybody in the group is, I don't know them well enough, but that collaboration means everybody collaborates with everybody else. You know, collaboration as a yeah.
Personally, I don't believe that, and I believe that, I understand that statement. There are people in the group that do believe that.
Right.
Okay? But I'm personally not,
Yeah, I don't believe it either. And I also think it goes on and off, depending on the topic, depending upon the time, depending on, some people are great.
Depending on skill set, depending on experience.
Skill sets and so on. And so one of my first mentors, Bala Pillai, he came up with this networked organizational structure that basically we ended up calling Little Red Monkeys. Now, Little Red Monkeys was leaders. The R stands for resourcers. M is for magnets. Little Red Monkeys climb. We had a little mnemonic, little story. Little Red Monkeys climb icy mountains to dance in colorful carpets. So you've got Little Red Monkeys and magnets. Little Red Monkeys climb. See the creators or the closers. Sometimes there's different. I say the intuitives. M is the makers. D is the doers. And CC, colorful carpets, are the collectors and the contractors or the consumers. That's the way. You changed it depending upon the model of society right now is the consumers at the end. But at the end, you have the counters, the accountants, and the contract people, the lawyers. They're the ones at the end of the chain that sort of, and the tail of the dog's been wagging the rest of it for a while, like accountants and lawyers deciding what happens, whereas we should be doing the other way, whereas the creators and the leaders decide, and then they say yes. Now, in any group of people, you will have people who are good at different ones of those. Some who are natural leaders, some who are very good at making things or creating, some are very good doers, and it's the doers that make the focus happen. They're the ones that get it done. And in my life and working life, I have not met many people that are like that. The ones who are just do, and get it done, that can execute something, there are not many of them. Because that requires really embodiment over a long period of time, and it's mechanical, and it's often very boring. Because getting things done, that is boring work. It's mechanical, like the work I've been doing on this farm. That house is going to take 5 weeks to do the roof, and it's boring. You just get up, you do the thing, you cut it, you get the tiles up, tiles down, boom. It's boring, but the guy who's running it, he wants it done before the rains come in the autumn. So it's his energy that's driving it. So in any situation, if you're going to get things done, it usually requires the doer and the leader to work together to make it happen. Others just like chatting, doing the imaginary vision work. Well, that's nice. We could do this. We could do this. Yeah. But when it comes to getting it done, it's usually the boring, mechanical people that get it done. And that's not exciting. And so, writing business plans.
May I riff on that theme?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Today in the U.S., with the way things are quote unquote being mismanaged through this COVID crisis, we have this term called essential workers. If that maps to this doers notion, okay, of keeping society going, you know, getting the people fed, getting the people health care, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Those people, in my view, could potentially map to your doers role. And therefore, the question becomes, is that undervalued? Which is, I think, the implication you are raising, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the people, and by the way, I mentioned in the chat, what about bankers, right? Bankers are the people that extract a lot of these values or manage all this, you know, extraction of value for the quote unquote leaders or quote unquote entrepreneurs in the model. And the essential workers, the doers, are not left with much of the recognition or compensation or share of goodness that has been created. You know, read wealth if you like. Okay. So that model says, almost describes the essential worker problem, you know, to a T. Is that these are people making $15 an hour and sometimes less, whereas you know every day Bezos and Gates and all these other guys make billions of dollars per day. So therefore, I can see the model. I can see the implication being not everybody needs to be involved in the visioning and the doing. Okay, others are, as I indicated, you know, they're bean counters, they're contract, you know, enforcers. You know, there are people who buy into the model and provide the capital because they purchase things. You know, so that's another kind of way to look at it. And I think it is a model. It is an approximation. There's clearly much to talk about there as well. And so I think the part that I'm hearing some agreement on is not everybody needs to be involved. There's some disrespect slash lack of recognition slash acknowledgement slash compensation for some of these doers. Because as you mentioned, even the mere fact of, hey, it's boring, right? It's repetitive. It's non-innovative. You know, it's just stuff that needs to be done, right? So that implies to me, if it's, you know, that way, people here in the US pay minimum wage or as little as they can get away with paying just to, you know, have people that do that work. Whereas without that, as we're seeing through this uh, virus issue, without it, society grinds to a halt. So our whole notion of value is backward and upside down.
And I'd also say that probably the majority of the work done in the world by people, regardless of machines helping them, is boring. You can have the idea, great, we're going to do this. Oh, it's exciting. You get together, you do the brainstorming, you work it all out, you plan it, you get the business plan, that may be exciting, I'm going to do the financing. Actually, from that point on, it's boring. And anyone who maintains a business, whether it's we make bags for cement, I don't know how people continue doing that. I have no idea how people find the energy every day to get up and make that. Usually it's the game of money. I want to make more profit this year. We're going to expand, diverse, and all these things. But generally, day by day, it's boring. And people are doing very mechanical things. So, you know, that idealized utopia of everything's done. There's enough food and it's growing itself. We're collecting, so we've got enough time for free time. What does that mean to people? Because a lot of people haven't got used to the idea of life without that boring element. And, you know.
It's a good point. I actually think that if it weren't boring, if it required innovation and new ways of doing things all the time, economies slash societies would also grind to a halt. There's not that much creativity that people want to invest in coming up with new methods to do the same result day after day after day after day. That almost requires too much creativity or just more than people are used to. So in a sense, the fact that it is boring allows it to continue.
Yeah.
Because we know what needs to be done. We
You
know we
want your
can predict
bankers
how much.
and your accountants to be boring.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they're exciting and creative, they're not going to keep your money safe. So, yeah.
Right. So anyway, I really find that having seeded this conversation with a video and having you watch it and take notes is actually a very good back and forth. In fact, I think there's still much to be discussed from that particular snippet, even though we've already gone perhaps, you know, close to half an hour already. So how do you find this kind of collaboration slash sharing of insights?
Well, it's useful because it gives us a focus, which is related to the subject, and get to see different perspectives on it. You know, from my side, I'm not I don't have videos I can point to which show people trying to collaborate. So it might be easier just to focus on the videos you've got. If there's somewhere, if I just go through all the GCSEs and just randomly pick one and I'll watch a bit and say, right, I noticed this is what I noticed. So for one thing that interests me, just from what you said today, is when I'm ever on with Doug, Doug's speed is slower. He's very slow and careful in the way he says things, and
Most of
I'm, you know, and that's one thing. And there's the speed of things. And then my main for the past years of facilitation was Fleming, and I know Fleming's facilitation style. I know the way I worked with for years, who's a brilliant facilitator, does that for a living, and there's something about her energy that is very good at picking up what's not being said.
who's the third person you mentioned?
Her name is Loea. She works. Her company is called Collective Transitions. She works all over the world. I work with her with a wind turbine company, and she's Swiss, and I don't know if that probably assists her in the way she does things. She's also a woman, and she's very good at perceiving what's not being said. And that's a very useful, and she takes care of everybody. She's very good at taking care of everybody, so she can tell he's sort of switched off. Is he all right? So if the ultimate is that, so I'll give an example from another thing. Was when I attended my storytelling course for 3 months. 21 people every day for 3 months. Now, we weren't trying to collaborate on anything, but we were in the same space for a long time. And one of the guys who ran it said that every time we do this, it takes about 3 weeks before a group identity to form. And once that identity is formed, if people do not align with that, they're going to break off. They're going to have structure. They're going to start attacking it. They're going to start leaving, like, internally, if you don't join with that grouping. So if the GCC, I don't know how long it takes to form that identity if there's similar people turning up, but once that's formed, either that is maintained and people agree with it, or they attack it or they leave. And that process seems to happen all the time with people. Therefore, if people keep coming and going, like in the one, I'm not sure if it was the one that you sent me or if it was last Saturday's, but a new guy appeared who didn't know what anyone was, so he was being explained to for the first time, this is what it is. And he had new questions. So if that keeps happening, you know, how does that affect the group? Yes. So I'm interested in that core identity that forms.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know we're getting close to where I have to break off myself to prepare for this other session, but let me just say a couple of notions on that one. That is, you're talking about this notion of onboarding. Well, for a long time, my position was there's nothing to onboard if we haven't got any agreements for people to onboard with. But if we do, then to me, onboarding almost necessarily kind of models what happens in, let's say, martial arts schools or elementary schools, right? You start at white belt, then you go to yellow belt, then you go to green belt, et cetera, as you gather more of the culture and more of the skill set and more of the, guidelines of what has been accepted. Just like, you learn things in, kindergarten, then you learn other things in, first grade, second grade, third grade, et cetera, because it builds on, the things you learned before. And right now, without any agreements, without a direction, and without any guidelines, and without an acknowledged skill set, that doesn't exist in GCC. So therefore, people who trigger versus people who are able to manage their own state, they're all mingled in the same group because we haven't made any distinctions or needs about how to do that. In my opinion, people who actually are able to keep focus and deal with their relatively minor triggers Major ones, they're different, okay? But if they're able to deal with their minor triggers and allow groups to keep focus, those groups can then evolve agreements, achievements, plans, actions, commitments. Those are all possible once we can actually attain focus. Without focus, in my opinion, those are very difficult, near impossible to achieve. And that's been at the crux of GCC for quite a while because I was there in the very first days of GCC. So I remember the original purpose. Doug, by the way, for the record, was not there in the first days. He came later. So he doesn't, in my opinion, act as though or even state that he's aligned with the original intention of the group. So that's why we've agreed to keep them mostly separate. The sessions he moderates are separate from the sessions I moderate. Even though I attend his sessions, he doesn't often attend mine. Okay. So anyway, just that as context. So would you like me to send another link to another video for next week, or shall we riff on this one again?
Let's do another one, and then we can look at both of them again.
Good idea. Hey, I appreciate the feedback. So one of the questions perhaps in your mind or my mind might be, how would we each, either individually or together, write up or craft up or diagram up or video up, whatever it is. I mean, we're videoing it up right now. How would we, co-create out of this? That would be kind of an interesting question,
Okay.
All right, cool. Are you?
Well, I think as just to finish with, as a proposition for any group, any business, anything, it's that thing. Is it what is it that stops or blocks you from maintaining focus to get things done? Because it's so deep on many levels that it might be that it only requires one or two people to have the skill set to drag people through it. That and that's because that happens everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll make my closing statement as well, and that is that one explicit experiment that I've personally engaged in GCC is to see whether we could do this without different levels of membership. In other words, can we treat everybody equally? And the more time goes by, the more my lean is towards no. That, as you said, some people need to bring the skill set or do the leadership or do the focusing or do the visioning or do the guideline setting or do the whatever it is, but I'm finding that emerging all of that in a group that's very fluid and non-identified is extremely difficult. And at least for me, I speak for myself, I'm not able to make that happen with a single membership, quote unquote, level. So that's just one of the experiments that I'm about to make a tentative conclusion on to move on.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Graham. This is a good conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.